If you know what SMIS is, if your company already has an SMIS provider, this session really isn't for you. This session is for people who are sitting on the fence, who haven't written an SMIS provider, or customers that actually want to use the benefits of SMIS. So it's really an introduction to SMIS, how it works, what it's for, the value proposition for using SMIS, both from a vendor perspective and an end user perspective. So SMIS is going to help you as a consumer, or it's going to help you as a vendor, either as a storage vendor or as a client management vendor. So companies like Tivoli, companies like Microsoft System Center Virtual Machine Manager, Red Hat. There's a lot of companies out there who do not produce hardware for storage that actually gain a lot of benefit from SMIS as well. So today, there's a bunch of ways to manage an array. So again, arrays aren't the only thing SMIS manages. However, let's just focus on them for a moment. Today, most of us have these methods to manage an array. You might have LCD panels. You might have an API that you've written that's open to the public. You might have a CLI program that's client-based. You might telnet or SSH directly into the device. This is a way you can manage most devices in the market. You're probably used to every one of these. In fact, you probably support 2/3 of the ones on that list. The problem that you've got is that the ones in green usually end up being embedded on the device, and the ones in red usually are updated independently of the controller. So there's another way to do that, which is you need to give all the benefits of all those previous methods. You need to have ubiquitous access, have to be able to get to it from anywhere. You need to be able to model very, very complex devices. You need to be able to scale to manage many devices at once, able to run across well-known ports, not require people to understand an API for a single device, and if we can, wouldn't it be great if it could work cross-vendor? And that's what SMIS is going to give us. It's going to give us all these benefits of all the previous modes you just saw without having to use any of those previous modes. And the way you do this is you separate the provider from the client. So a hardware vendor may be responsible for building an SMIS provider. This allows an SMIS compliant device to expose all of its goodness, all of its devices, all of its capacity, all of its consumable product to a consumer. That consumer doesn't have to understand anything about the client device or about the provider. All he has to do is talk SMIS, and he can now run multi-vendor without recoding. So the idea is the client can be very independent from the provider. You providing a provider don't have to worry about the client side, nor does the client side have to worry about how you make your provider work. They just have to make sure that your provider does work according to the spec. So the client, by the way, the client here is not necessarily something like a Tivoli. It could actually be an operating system itself. For instance, Red Hat and Microsoft in the base operating system now understand SMIS. It's very easy to install. I'll show you how to do that in a moment as well. This right here is the current timeline and when the specs have been released. Notice the 1.7 spec is imminently coming right now, and the 1.8 spec is being worked on as we speak. Notice that over time, we have had ANSI spec collaboration, and over time, ISO has been certifying the spec. It used to be that we went down the ANSI path, now we're starting to go down the ISO path. So note, we just gained 1.5. Note that the newest spec is not 1.5. 1.5 was a stable version of the spec. However, ISO has finally standardized on 1.5. They're a little bit behind us, but the point is, as the spec rolls forward, industry organizations are adopting these specs as standards as well. So this should give you an idea of where the spec is going. Now, today, you're probably used to a proprietary based management method. And there are some benefits of using a vendor-specific management method instead of SMIS. No distinction between standard and platform-specific metrics, usually written to a vendor's API if a public one exists. Processes vendor platform and very specific. So some of these things you can do with a vendor spec are very, very powerful. However, the benefits you gain from using the open spec is that any vendor can come in and do those operations. I know that's kind of weird. If you're a storage vendor, do you really want anyone being able to come in and carve out new LUNs or create new shares or create new replication from site to site? This is what this does. This opens this up for you. Opens this up for you as a vendor. If you're a storage vendor, opens this up, or a switch vendor for that matter, or an HBA vendor, opens it up to let your equipment be consumed by other entities, more or less out of your control. So we talked in the last session about Redfin, if you've been in that session. Redfin is part of DMTF, as is the SIM model. SMIS is on the SIM model. And more importantly, the newest SMIS 1.7, we actually went through and did a major cleanup effort. Many thanks to Jeff Goldner for that. He was leading that effort to pull out all of the SMIS specific calls, and everything is based on SIM. So in the back end, we are DMTF. But note, there's ongoing different projects as well. So SMIS is not about LUNs, it's not about shares, it's about HBAs, it's about switches. It's about a lot of other things. It's about remote replication. It's about thin provisioning. It's about deduplication. It's about compression. It's about all these things. And it's gotten very, 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 very complex. It's very, very expandable. And a lot of things that were experimental in the very, very first versions of the spec are now, we've actually flushed those out. Some things have become permanent. Some things that were experimental that have not panned out have simply been dropped. So again, we need to be able to manage all the things. Discovery, provisioning, replication, monitoring. It's not enough to carve a LUN out and say you're done, unless you can actually determine that a hard drive failed, or unless you can determine that you have a snapshot of a remote site that's not mountable. So it doesn't, managing your storage does not include simply provisioning. It includes the ongoing management that goes day after day. You have to be able to monitor that stuff, you have to be able to manage it, you have to be able to check performance. There's a lot of things that go along with management that are commonly ignored. SMIS is not about that. SMIS is about the life cycle. You can manage it from day 1 to day 100. So these are some of the terms: extents, storage pools, logical volumes, logical sets. And again, this spec is designed to handle HBAs, switches, routers, tape libraries, storage arrays. It's designed to handle a large gambit of things, but you don't have to consume all of that. There's a number of books. The spec is organized into books. If you don't have removable media, you don't have to support that book. If you don't have tape libraries, you don't have to support the media changer book. So there's a whole bunch of books you can actually simply ignore if you're not doing that thing. This is actually what those books look like. So again, if I care about logical units, clones, snapshots, I can decide to take up some of these and not others. If my device doesn't use switches, doesn't use hosts and ports and routers, I can ignore most of that work. So again, the spec doesn't have to be as complex as you think it would be. It's very daunting to look at the SMIS spec and think this is a massive thing, but you can consume it in smaller pieces. So with that said, this is a common way to deploy it. These are the two methods you can use to deploy. So this is the common ways that they're deployed. You can either build your SMIS agent as an actual piece that sits inside of your array. And again, a lot of arrays out there have web-based enterprise management built right into them, and adding the agent here may not be a very large thing to do. However, as the array gets bigger, as it gets more complex, as you have to handle things like indications, because drives fail, things like that, this agent may grow beyond what you want embedded inside of your array. At that point, it's very easy to go with an agent model, at which point the agent can talk any proprietary language you want to your device. And again, this doesn't have to be an array, it could be a switch. This agent can talk to your device in any language you want, any way you want. Yet, on the front end to the clients, it's all SMIS. So a request for a new share comes from the client over to the agent. The agent then repackages that in the proper method for this device and sends it. Again, these are the two methods that it gets deployed in. Now, if you update the array, you update the agent. If you update the array here, you may be on the old agent. You may want to do an update of the agent. Or you could find out that the new spec came out. SMIS agent 1.5.1 is now rolling to 1.6. without changing your array in any way whatsoever, including downtime, reboot, anything, you could actually re-roll this agent. So there are benefits to both ways. Again, we're not here to tell you which way is right. We're just here to tell you there are two different methods to do it. So here's a couple examples. Microsoft, as a client, has actually put Windows standards-based storage management into the OS. Right inside the OS, it knows how to talk natively to an SMIS device. Red Hat has done the exact same thing. Again, here's very simple installs. I'm going to show you what that looks like as well. So here is an example of a machine that we're going to actually consume some SMIS storage. So this is Server 2012 R2. If you notice, I go into volumes, I go into my storage pools, and I've got nothing. So I can't really deploy new storage. So what I'm going to do, I've got an SMIS agent out there sitting in the real world, and I'm going to do a search because the SMIS protocol has a service level provider such that I can do a search for an SMIS provider. I don't know if you can see that well. It says search-SMIS provider, and it's going out and actually searching my subnet to find out if I have any SMIS providers out there. Now, in this case, this is being run in the labs in Colorado Springs, and I'm pulling back a whole bunch of different vendors. I've got HP, I've got EMC, I've got NetApp, I've got many different vendors. All I have to do now is register the SMIS provider using the connection URL, standard IP address, and as soon as I do, it'll ask me for my credentials, and then it will give me my certificate. Once I've got my certificate, all the communication is encrypted at that point. So username and password. And here's where I get my trusted certificate. Now once I do this, I say, all right, now that we've connected to the agent and we're authorized to use that agent, let's go ahead and get my storage provider and list out which storage providers I'm connected to. And again, there's my new SMIS agent right there. Now note, from the array vendor on this server, nothing's been installed. This is base OS functionality, nothing extra. Now I'm going to get storage subsystem, and I see I have an array out there called SMIS_SCVMM. Once I discover that I have an array sitting out there connected to the SMIS agent, I can actually do what's called a discovery. So it's update storage provider cache, discovery level 2. Now, Microsoft has defined a few different discovery levels. Level 1 is find me the names of devices, I don't care about anything else. Level 2 is find me the names of devices, find me what LUNs are on that device, find me the RAID groups, that kind of thing. And then level 3 goes much, much deeper and says, get me all the way down to the drives, the serial numbers on individual drives. Now, if I go back into storage pools and do a refresh or rescan, you're going to see a new device pop up. And again, nothing is loaded on this but base OS. No vendor software, nothing. There's my new arrays. I have two arrays out there. I have an array with two different pools, one called SAN, one called NTFS. Now you notice that I got a terabyte for each of them, and I'm going to create a new virtual disk. Now virtual disk in their terms is a LUN. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a new LUN on that array to assign. 15 gig LUN. Notice it supports thin provisioning. Here it's actually going to the array and actually doing all those operations. Now this is a real simple one because I haven't actually mounted that LUN anywhere, I've just created it. So again, built right into the OS. You'll notice now I can discover that LUN sitting out on that array. Does that kind of make sense of how a client can consume it? Now I'd love to show you this on another array like an EMC, Hitachi, HP, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, and the reason it doesn't matter is those steps don't look any different. They look identical. Now remember, I'm come from a storage vendor. Probably the scariest thing in the world is when you tell me that you can deploy an HP, an EMC, Hitachi, NetApp, whoever, and they all look the same because it makes us all commodities, right? Not exactly, and the reason it doesn't make you a commodity is because each of these different methods tells the array to turn on thin provisioning, to create a LUN and all that. If you happen to think your array does thin provisioning, dedupe, compression, whatever, better than the competition, you still get to do it your way. You're not doing it some way that the OS is telling you to do it. You're still enabling all the magic inside of your own array. They're just exposing the magic.
You have alerts for
Sorry?
You have alerts in provision?
Yes, you do. Alerts are all taken care of as well. And those alerts are customizable. So when you make an SMIS provider, one thing you want to do is run through the conformance testing program. This is a sample of what that looks like. Here's an array. In this case, Dell Compellent Storage System, SC8000. Here are the different books that array has actually tested against. It's tested active-passive. It's tested against the array in the server profile. And it tells you exactly what version of the spec it tested against. So this is an example. Once you run the conformance testing program, there are hundreds of test submissions out there that have completed that you will find all match up to the right spec. Now, for instance, if you're using Microsoft System Center Virtual Machine Manager, you want to make sure you're at spec 1.5 or newer. If you're using Tivoli, you want to be 1.4 or newer. If you're using different packages, may require a certain version of the spec or newer. But the point is, you can go to the conformance testing page at SNIA and look up any device you want and see if it's what spec it's at. And all you have to do then is download the agent from that vendor and get yourself up to spec. These are the current voting members of SNIA. You notice there's some new companies in here as well. So every one of these is a voting member today. And this was updated as of, I think, 3 weeks ago. I think this was updated 3 weeks ago because we have actually a new member since then even. The newest members we have, I believe, are Pure Storage, Nimble Storage, Tegel, and IntelliMagic, I think, were the ones that just joined recently. So the spec is gaining steam. This is more members than we've ever had. Now, we currently have 34 different companies participating. And the funny thing is that number's actually gone down a little bit because companies have been bought. For instance, when NetApp bought Ingenio, that used to be 2 companies that both joined separately. Boom, they're one. EMC, Data Domain, one. I mean, different companies, when they get bought up, that actually shrinks that down, but it does not shrink the number of conformant products. Now, the conformant product list is almost 1,300 here. That looks deceptively high. The reason is because that's all the different versions of the same code base. For instance, one array that happened to have 3 different versions, a 8,000 model, a 9,000 model, a 10,000 model, but it all runs the same base, we count those as different conforming products. But we've got almost 500 test submissions. That should tell you about how many products we really have. So if you have a product X, which have 3 variants, but they all run the same OS, you submit one test submission of the most complex one, and then all 3 of them get pulled in. That's why the conformant products is much higher than test submissions. Now, we also have the lab program. This is great for vendors, and it's great for OEMs, or companies like Tivoli. The reason is even if you don't make hardware, you want to be in this lab program. And the reason is you want to have your management software that manages other people's hardware be able to see the largest pool possible. A lot of these companies have spent tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars building these interop labs. The point is, this one already exists. It has all the vendor hardware out there in the market. Well, it's got a lot of vendor hardware out there that is already SMIS compatible. The SMIS agents have already been installed and ready. They're all using common passwords. You, as for instance, if you're ServiceNow, you go into here, you can then test your management application across vendors. You now can test all these different things against each other and find out and say, well, this LUN provisioning method works beautifully here and here and here and here and here. That's a lot easier, as let's say ServiceNow, than it is to go to each of those individual vendors and beg for gear. When a vendor comes to me and says, I have some SAN management product or some NAS management product, I want to deploy that NAS management product to manage your stuff. I'm like, that's great. We'd love for you to manage our stuff. Well, could you give me free hardware? No, but I can point you to a lab where we can get access to it. This is where you send people to get them access to free hardware. And again, all remotely accessible. And any member of SNIA get into the lab program. A lot of people don't realize you have this asset. If you're at one of these companies that's already a voting member, you probably have lab access already. You just simply need to know who at your own company to contact. Very useful program. So here's another video I'm going to show you real quick. We talked about indications, and we talked about the fact that you have to be able to manage stuff after the fact. It's not enough to deploy a LUN if you don't know what's going on with that LUN. So in this one, I'm going to go ahead and add another array, and this is going to be some obsolete array I found in the hallway. So you can see I have an array, and that array has two different pools. I'm going to go ahead, and what I've done is I've connected my agent, and again, I have one agent that's talking to that first array. I've now connected the agent to two more or three more arrays. So I haven't changed the server at all. But you notice now it's doing four different discovery processes because it's already connected the agent. So the idea is me as a storage administrator, when I want to deploy new storage and make new arrays available to a customer, I connect it to the agent and then I'm done. I walk away from it. You'll notice I now have more arrays in the list with more LUNs. This gives you the ability to separate the storage administrator duties from the server administrator duties. I can deploy my storage to the SMIS agent, give the SMIS agent passwords to get my storage. Then I can give the server administrator access to the agent. The server administrator then can deploy LUNs as he sees fit. I don't have to deploy daily LUNs anymore. I don't have to deploy a 100 gig LUN for you and a 10 gig LUN for you and a 30 gig LUN for you. I can actually hand over that control to the server administrator without the server administrator having to understand how the hardware of the array works. And more importantly, I can do it cross-vendor. Notice here, I'm actually opened up a drive and I found a faulted drive. Here's a RAID set, there's a faulted drive. Here's another RAID set. There are the serial numbers of the actual drives. And again, building new LUNs, it's very, very simple. This time I'm going to do something different. You see I have a whole list of LUNs, or a whole list of RAID groups in different controllers I can now choose from. Always make them thin. So this time I'm going to grab a LUN, but more importantly, I want to assign that LUN to somebody. Notice, I'm actually going to assign it to the server. It's going to create the I group for me. It's going to rescan the disk from that server. It's going to initialize the disk, and it's going to update the cache. So in this way, again, built into the OS, the array has nothing to do with this. I'm going to inventory a large selection of arrays, all disparate arrays, could be multi-vendor. I'm going to choose to create a LUN. I'm going to choose that LUN to be exposed directly to a server via creation of an I group, the mapping of that I group. Then it will log into that server remotely. We're going to run the initialized disk and bring that drive online. So you can see, those are just two examples of how this can be used. Now the management interface from ServiceNow is going to look very different than this. The management interface from Red Hat is going to be different than this. But the point is they're all going to work cross-vendor. Now Microsoft recently released a product called Azure Site Recovery. I don't know if you've heard of it. It gives you the ability to mirror an array from a data center to a data center. More importantly, when you go from data center A to data center B, and you decide you want to use the array to do all the heavy lifting, it will discover if that array is SMIS compatible. If it is, it will enable you to do SAN mirroring, at which point it will kick off, if you're EMC, it'll kick off SRDF. If you're NetApp, it'll kick off SnapMirror. It'll kick off the native mirroring technology built into the array, assuming it's licensed. Now you've got a host initiating a mirror operation between two arrays on different sites. You now have disaster recovery. Note the SMIS protocol does not handle disaster recovery. The SMIS protocol handles the Lego blocks to build it. Because we handle the replication, we handle setting up the snapshots, we handle all that stuff. But you can build any application you want on it that call those Lego blocks any way you want. So we have PlugFest as well. So a lot of times, if you haven't written a SMIS provider yet, or if you're trying to bring your SMIS provider from a previous version to the newer version by adding the new books, you want to actually show up to these things, and you'll actually get some help, some in-person help, and you're going to be able to be sitting with your peers. And it's a very cooperative opportunity. In fact, there's a SMB3 Plugfest going on downstairs right now with the exact same concept in mind. So we handle these about 6 a year. We try and host at least 2 or 3 of them in the San Jose area, because we know there's a large number of companies here that do it. But usually when we do a hosting in another site like San Jose, we rely on other companies to actually host it. For instance, Plugfest 3 back in May was hosted on the NetApp site. It's kind of weird having EMC, HP, Hitachi employees all go to a NetApp site, but the point is, SMIS protocol is just that. It brings a lot of companies together who normally compete with each other for a common good. And Microsoft hosted in March in both San Jose and China. So we're doing international Plugfest as well. Now I should note, this Plugfest was international because we actually had lines connecting the two, and we had common meetings at one time. So the guys in China were up really, really late. But we have 2 more Plugfests coming up. We have one, and by the way, if they're not specified where they're at, they're in Colorado Springs at NetApp headquarters. And again, NetApp headquarters is where the SNIA labs are for doing SMIS. That's where the SMIS lab is. However, everything can be done remotely. Remember, this is all management traffic. We can do everything remotely. So it doesn't matter that we're doing these outside of the state. But again, if you're a member of SNIA already and you have not been to a Plugfest, these are kind of interesting events. You can learn a lot of information here. So we have a conformance testing page. We just opened up a LinkedIn SMIS group. We have the technology forum, and we have the spec on here as well. But the point is, the spec is mutable. We will change the spec. We will add things to the spec. I know one thing we've discussed recently was adding a Cinder block driver to the spec, so we can start understanding Cinder and S3. So the spec is expanding to handle more. If you look back to the 1.4 spec, it didn't cover NAS. It didn't cover SMB3. It didn't cover NFS. We do now. So again, that's only been in the past, 4 years, 3 years, that we brought in NAS protocols. So this is where you all can help. If you see something you want in the spec, let's do it. Let's write it. Let's get it in there. And if we need to create a new book to do it, we have the templates to do that as well. We can make it really helpful for you. All right, thank you guys.